Something is happening to music and popular culture at the moment, something that nobody would have predicted a couple years ago. This phenomenon can be highlighted by simply going on TikTok or doing the less degenerate thing of going to a busy city or a concert. I can guarantee any of these activities will result in at least 4 e-girls wearing Deftones t-shirts coming into your peripheral vision. If you're not educated in the art of TikTok and bandwagon culture online, you might be a bit confused by this entire ordeal. Deftones are obviously an incredibly diverse band that appeals to many people, but that doesn't really explain why thirst traps are being made specifically about this dude, specifically at this time. Usually when music suddenly becomes popular on social media, it's linked to some kind of media property or event. For example, when Master of Puppets was prominently featured on Stranger Things, and I got the pleasure of witnessing the call center NPCs at my old job physically recoil at one of the most popular metal songs of all time playing on the radio. The sudden popularity of Deftones doesn't really follow this mold. It's as if a horde of split hair having, black lipstick wearing e-girls entered this reality through a portal whilst Be Quiet and Drive played at an ear-blistering volume. In reality, it's a bit less fantastical than that, and can only really be theorised. It's difficult to get a concrete answer due to the lack of specific event or media property being linked to the popularity. In order to understand the sudden popularity of Deftones and the insurgence of the Deftones girl, we need to go back and look through the history of the band and see what made Deftones popular in the first place. Let's speedrun this. Deftones formed in 1988, consisting of a group of friends linked by the skateboarding scene in the area. It would actually be the art of skateboarding that led guitarist Stephen Carpenter to the instrument, not the positive side of skateboarding though. He was essentially just hit by a car, resulted in confinement to a wheelchair, leading Carpenter to teach himself guitar, originally playing many of the thrash classics. They suddenly realised after years of friendship that each of the friends had played an instrument and decided to form a band. Originally playing music influenced by hardcore punk and heavy metal, they essentially just practiced and about for a few years, releasing a few demos and consistently improving. You may be wondering why the name Deftones. Why did they choose such an ugly name for such diverse and sometimes beautiful music? It's essentially a combination of two terms, one of which being slang. Def is a slang term within hip hop for great, whilst tones essentially means, so the name just means good tones pretty much. The band would release their debut album Adrenaline in 1995 to very little commercial success. Nobody really gave a f**k apart from the people who did give a f**k, and trust me, those people really did give a f**k, which led to Deftones beginning to form a cult-like following, which spread through extensive touring and word of mouth. Eventually the album began to perform better commercially, spending 21 weeks on the Billboard Heatseekers charts. This is when we approach the time period in the band's career that e-girls and e-girl lovers really froth over, the release of Around the Fur in 1997, which has proven to be one of the most successful and beloved albums from the new metal scene. I think a lot of its merit is based off the way in which it was produced and how that allowed for variety. The band didn't really have any plan for the project and only began writing during studio sessions, deciding to focus more so on the production element of the music, making the songs feel expansive. This allowed for various tones and contrast between the softer and heavier segments of the songs to actually sound good, and not like a muddy, distorted piece of shit that jump scares you every time the singer screams. The same kind of variety was utilised for the rhythm as well, with a different snare drum being used for every song. This variety even stretched to the vocals, ranging from shrieks to extremely fruity moans. All this combined with some catchy goddamn riffs and an edge that would make anyone who looks like this screech in excitement and bewilderment, further thrusted them towards the mainstream, and at the very least cemented them as a powerhouse within the alternative metal underground. The year 2000 would see the release of the band's most successful album to date, White Pony, which saw a more time-intensive production period, with the band spending a lot more of their time on the writing period of the music. They also focused heavily on working as a unit, whatever that means. Upon release, critics and fans praised the softer sound on the album, and Deftones proved, once again, that not only were they extremely varied, but the fact that nobody could create horny juice music better than them. As the early 2000s began to chug along, this suddenly wasn't cool anymore, I wonder why, which forced many of nu metal's elite to either diversify their sound and image, or just wait for nu metal to be popular again. Surprisingly, both methods actually worked for some reason. Deftones continued to release album after album that sonically differed from one another, creating a discography that is vast and distinct in terms of genre conventions, delving into elements of shoegaze, post-punk and dream pop. So that explains one aspect of Deftones' popularity, their ability to consistently produce sonically unique projects, which evidently has to explain at least some of their sudden resurgence of popularity. Diversity allows a band to appeal to a lot more people. If sudden shrieks and screams are a bit too scary for you, you can instead listen to this dude moan about waves for 4 minutes straight. In reality, Deftones' discography has something that can appeal to pretty much any fan of alternative music. This in turn makes them extremely friendly to individuals who may not have much experience of the heavier side of music. Like legitimately, some of these Deftones girl TikToks showed transformations from Taylor Swift stan to Deftones enjoyer. What further adds to this is the band's focus on melody in many of the songs. Many of the songs are extremely catchy, with simple riffs and rhythms being the main focus of the song. This adds to its virality ability, specifically on platforms like TikTok, where shorter content reigns supreme. In order to be successful, songs have to be appealing in extremely short snippets, which works in Deftones' favour. Although these are all possibilities, it doesn't fully explain why this individual would be so obsessed with Deftones. Like, you don't see the same kind of ego love for the bass god himself. So let's look into a few more aspects of Deftones that made them so popular during their rise, and see how that relates to the modern day. Although their image was pretty low-key and relatively normal in comparison to the other freakazoids that made up the nu metal scene, it was still appealing and, in my opinion, more future-proof in terms of trends. They managed to capture the Y2K early 2000s look without going overboard and straight up wearing a purple tracksuit or a Halloween costume. This allowed them to insert themselves nicely into the scene at the time without blending into the degeneracy too much. This heavily links to their popularity today in my eyes. In a time period where attention spans are at their lowest, an image leads to clicks. This is obviously going to perform better than this. This theory can even span to their album covers, with many of Deftones' projects having really appealing and easily recognisable album art. Realistically, if we look at the reason for the nu metal revival, a lot of it has to do with the image, and the nu metal revival has in turn boosted the popularity of Deftones. So why are Deftones at the top of this popularity pyramid, as opposed to bands like Korn or System of a Down? Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the vulnerability and softness that can come across in a lot of their music. Metal is a very angry genre of music, and oftentimes fails to appeal to a mass audience because of this. Not many people realistically want to listen to this dude scream for 4 minutes. This is where Deftones really shines, appealing to the emotional side of many more individuals, not to mention the way in which the band were able to mould the time period as opposed to being moulded by it. The band were never really willing to succumb to gimmicks or the conventions of the time. They continued to experiment and create the music they wanted to make. This resulted in a sound that embodies the spirit and aesthetic of the time period that as of late has become extremely nostalgic for individuals who weren't even alive during it. As time progresses, the whole born in the wrong generation thing will continue to move forward in time, and right now, TikTok users wish they were covered in mud at Ozfest as opposed to mindlessly consuming slop content. You're welcome, by the way. We will never know the exact reasons the band have suddenly exploded in popularity and continued to remain extremely popular and relevant for almost a year now. It's likely a combination of things. It definitely isn't all because conventionally attractive women put Nightcore remixes of Deftones songs over their Get Ready With Me makeup and transformation TikToks, inspiring more attractive women to do the same, which in turn attracted many down bad individuals to the band to try to impress said women. It definitely isn't because young people today would rather have their tastes shaped by an algorithm than real life experiences. It definitely isn't all that.